The first time Emily noticed it, she almost convinced herself it was nothing, a faint trembling in his hand when he reached for his coffee mug. It was barely a flicker, the kind of detail most people would overlook in a busy morning, but Emily saw it. She saw everything, quietly, from the corners of rooms where no one paid her much attention. She was the silent maid in a world of glittering suits and polished floors, moving like a shadow between executive offices and private lounges, existing without acknowledgement. But shadows can sometimes see what light blinds people to. And what Emily witnessed that day, though she didn't yet understand it, would be the first thread in a chain of moments that would lead to saving a man's life. Inside the grand, glass-walled headquarters of Brookstone Enterprises, no one had time for small details. Phones buzzed, keyboards clicked, deals were sealed behind heavy conference room doors. The CEO, Daniel Ashford, was a man whose presence filled the air the moment he entered a room, tall, confident, with a voice that could command the attention of an entire board in seconds. He had an aura of untouchable strength, the kind of authority people rarely questioned. But as Emily carefully folded fresh towels in the executive lounge, she noticed something that didn't fit the image. His usual brisk, purposeful walk seemed slower that morning. There was a stiffness in his stride, and a subtle wince crossed his face when he shifted his weight. Most would dismiss it as nothing more than fatigue after a long week, but Emily's eyes lingered. She tucked the image away in her mind like a secret she wasn't sure she should keep. Emily wasn't the kind of person to speak up easily. Life had taught her the safety of silence. Growing up in a small town, she had been the quiet girl in class, the one who absorbed the world through listening rather than speaking. After her father's sudden death, her family's life unrevealed quickly. Bills piled up, her mother's health faltered, and Emily left school earlier than she'd planned to help keep a roof over their heads. The job in the city as a maid wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and she was good at it, meticulous, dependable, invisible. Over time, invisibility had become her shield, allowing her to navigate the world unnoticed. But on certain days, like that one, it felt more like a curse, keeping her locked in silence when she wished she could speak. Over the following week, the little things began to add up. She noticed a glass of water left almost untouched during a high-stakes meeting. She saw the way Daniel's fingers would sometimes press against his temple, as if trying to chase away a persistent headache. There was a faint, almost imperceptible catch in his breathing when he climbed a flight of stairs, a brief pause he covered with a confident stride. Each detail, on its own, might have meant nothing. But Emily saw them all, piecing them together in the quiet corners of her mind, wondering if they meant something more. Small signs had been scattered across the days like breadcrumbs, each one so faint on its own that most people wouldn't notice, but together they formed a picture Emily couldn't stop seeing. A picture no one else seemed to be looking at. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it wasn't her place, that she was imagining things, that she was letting her mind spin stories out of shadows. But deep down, somewhere beneath the layers of practiced detachment she had worn for years, a quiet alarm bell kept ringing. It wasn't loud, it was steady, patient, insistent. The kind of warning that sits in the chest and refuses to leave. One evening, long after the building had emptied and the polished halls echoed with the faint hum of cleaning equipment, Emily was tidying the executive lounge. The skyline outside was streaked with the deep blues and soft golds of a city settling into night. She was folding a stack of fresh towels when she heard something from Daniel Ashford's office. It wasn't the click of keys or the murmur of a phone call. It was coughing, deep, harsh, relentless. A sound that clawed at the throat just to hear it. Emily froze in the doorway, her hands still on the towels, torn between the instinct to walk away and the pull to knock. Her heart began to pound in her ears. After a moment that stretched far too long, she took one hesitant step forward, then another, until she could see him through the half-open door. Daniel was hunched over his desk, one hand gripping the polished wood so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His other hand pressed to his chest as he coughed, his shoulders shaking with the force of it. His face was pale, more than pale. It was almost gray, as if the life had been drained from it. Then, suddenly, he stopped. His eyes lifted to hers, and for a fraction of a second, the mask of the untouchable CO slipped. In those eyes she saw something she had never seen before in him. Not command, not confidence, not control. Fear. Raw and unguarded. It was the kind of fear that came from knowing something was wrong, and knowing it might be too late to stop it. Daniel straightened quickly, forcing his posture back into something resembling normal. He waved her off with a casual gesture, his voice rough but dismissive. "Just need some rest," he said, as if his body hadn't just betrayed him in front of someone else. He didn't wait for her to respond before turning back to his desk, his hands still gripping the edge like an anchor. Emily backed away, the moment hanging heavy between them, unspoken but impossible to erase. That night she went home, but sleep never came. She lay awake in her small apartment, the city lights casting fractured patterns on the ceiling. The sound of his coughing replayed in her mind over and over, sharp and ragged, like a warning she couldn't ignore. Eventually she sat up and opened her old laptop, her fingers trembling as she typed symptom after symptom into the search bar. Headaches. Trembling hands. Shortness of breath. Fatigue. Every medical page she clicked seemed to tighten the knot in her stomach until it felt like a stone lodged beneath her ribs. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't even someone whose voice carried weight in a company like Brookstone Enterprises. She was a maid, a quiet, unnoticed presence in a building where power wore tailored suits and spoke in numbers. Yet the certainty in her chest was unshakable. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. And whatever it wasn't something that could wait. But how could she step into a world of board members, legal advisors, and private physicians, and tell them that their CO might be in danger, based only on the quiet observations of someone who cleaned their offices after hours? She could already imagine the ridicule, the polite smiles masking dismissal. She could see herself being told she was overstepping, that she didn't understand, that this wasn't her business. And yet, as the night stretched into the early hours of morning, Emily sat at her kitchen table, her untouched mug of tea growing cold beside her, and knew she was standing at the edge of a choice. She could keep her head down, keep folding towels and wiping down tables, and pretend she hadn't seen the things she had seen. Or she could risk everything, the job, the quiet safety of her invisibility, to try and save a man who, as far as the rest of the world knew, didn't need saving. Still, Emily's conscience would not let her remain silent. The memory of Daniel's pallor, the tremor in his hands, the sound of that relentless cough, each detail had embedded itself too deeply in her mind to be ignored. That night she had weighed her fear against the nagging sense that her silence might cost him his life. By the time dawn broke, she knew what she had to do. Even if it was the scariest thing she had ever dared. The next morning, she waited in the executive lounge, her hands twisting together as the minutes dragged by. When Daniel arrived, brisk and composed as always, she stepped forward before her courage could vanish. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice unsteady, "may I speak to you privately?" He gave her a brief, curious glance but agreed. Inside his office, surrounded by the sleek furniture and the glass walls that looked out over the city, Emily took a shaky breath and began to explain. She told him about the tremor she had seen, the stiffness in his movements, the pallor in his face, the way he seemed short of breath. Every word felt like it might shatter the fragile line she was crossing. She expected a dismissive smile, maybe even a polite laugh, and for him to thank her before sending her back to her duties. But instead, she saw something shift in his expression. The faint trace of amusement faded, replaced by a quiet seriousness. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice. Maybe it was the fact that no one else had noticed, or cared enough to say anything. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he nodded once. "I'll see my doctor," he said simply, as if the decision had already been made. 2 days later, Emily's phone rang. It was Daniel's assistant, her voice urgent yet steady, asking Emily to come to the hospital. The words that followed made Emily's knees go weak. Daniel had been diagnosed with a severe blood clot in his leg, a condition that, if left untreated, could have traveled to his lungs or brain within days. The doctors told him that if it hadn't been caught now, it might have been too late. Emily sat in the staff room afterward, the phone still warm in her hand, staring at the floor as the weight of what had almost happened pressed down on her. She realized she hadn't just spoken up, she had helped save a man's life. Weeks later, when Daniel returned to the office, he walked with a steadiness she hadn't seen in months, his color restored, his movements strong. He called Emily into his office, not quietly, but in front of his senior staff. In the same space where she had once stood invisible, clutching folded towels, he told the room that she, not the doctors, not the meetings, not the endless business deals, had saved his life. He said it was because she had noticed what everyone else missed, and because she had the courage to act. Then he did something that left her speechless. He promoted her. Emily was given a new position as the company's wellness coordinator, tasked with ensuring employees received regular health checks and had a place to turn if they felt unwell. Sometimes, Daniel said, looking around the room, the smallest voice in the room sees the biggest truth. From that day forward, Emily's life changed. She was no longer invisible. She carried with her not just a new role and a new respect, but the unshakable knowledge that paying attention, truly paying attention, could change everything. Not everyone gets the chance to save a life. But everyone has the power to notice, to care, and to act when it matters most.